the broken money message is clearly resonating with people. So why did you write your book about broken money? And could you summarize what the fundamental problem with our money is and why it's broken?
Sure. So yeah, at that conference, Pacific Bitcoin, when I was signing books, we eventually ran out of copies because I didn't order enough, and so I started to sign hyperinflated Venezuelan bolivars as bookmarks, um, and that kind of I think that alone says why I wrote the book. The fact that that happens to people is why I wrote the book, right? So, um, we're in a world. What's broke with money is the fact that we're in a world where there are 160 different plus fiat currencies, and some of them are halfway decent, like the dollar or the euro or the yen, and the long tail of them are more acutely in your face problematic, right? So if you're in Nigeria, your money supply is going up by 12 to 15% a year on average. If you're in Egypt, your money supply is going up by 20% a year. If you're in Argentina, Turkey, Lebanon, I mean, it's going up way faster. If you're in Venezuela, you just got completely hyperinflated. There are currently about 30 countries in the world with double-digit inflation officially, a little bit more than that when you measure them more directly unofficially. And the population in those countries is about 1 billion people, give or take. And then when you add in, authoritarianism, so just arbitrary bank freezes, no rule of law, billions of people in the world live in these little currency bubbles, and their money's not really accepted outside of their country. In their own environment, they're in like a little fiat matrix, right? It's like this is they're in this constant dilution. And if you're facing 20% annual money supply growth, you got to try to increase your wages by 20% a year. If you're a small business, you got to try to increase your prices by 20% a year. If you're a landlord, you got to try to increase your rent by 20% a year. If you're a saver or otherwise, just trying to hold your value of your prior years of work, you have to figure out how to not get that diluted. How do you increase that by 20% a year? And that's like a fast treadmill that everybody's on. And in the developed world, we have the same thing. It's just more subtle. So instead of 20% annual money supply growth, we have like 7%. And so it's not as in our face, but it's just like this very slow moving version of the same problem, where if we're not careful, we wake up 10 years later and we've been heavily diluted. And those who have arbitraged the money are way better off, and those of us who were not paying attention to the money find ourselves with a much smaller share, despite really no fault of our own, other than just not being like monetary experts or arbitrageurs. And that's not a healthy state of affairs. And what I argue in the book is that it's partially a political decision, but when you see this kind of thing happen globally, right? When there's zero gold standards in the world, when there's zero full reserve banking environments in the world, it's more than a political decision. It's a technological limitation. It's a damaging of the incentives in some way that technology has tilted things towards a certain set of outcomes.
What makes Lynn so special to me is her ability to think critically from a first principles standpoint with an engineering background, as well as being able to communicate those thoughts clearly and concisely. I happen to agree with her. Number one, I happen to agree that market cap is set at the margins downwind of price, and therefore Bitcoin's price in terms of US dollars could appreciate incredibly rapidly, perhaps by orders of magnitude in each coming cycle. Secondly, I happen to agree that a lot of rehypothecation and fake paper Bitcoin and yield products are ahead of us. I think volatility will continue. And therefore, number three, I happen to agree with her that I think self-custody is really important for you to consider and really important for you to consider urgently. And number four, Lynn and I both talk about how collaborative custody, multi-sig solutions could be a viable option for many people in the coming future. And so, if you have an interest in taking self-custody, if you have an interest in setting up a multi-sig solution and collaborative custody partnership, I do work at the Bitcoin Advisor precisely for this purpose because I think it is the future. You can find me in the link in the description below at the Bitcoin Advisor, where our primary goal is to help you securely transition your Bitcoin off exchanges into your own hands and into your own self-sovereignty. It's really important that you begin considering what happens to you in the event that you lose your seed phrases, what happens to you in the event that you pass on. Will your children, your loved ones, your company, your spouse, whomever your descendants are, what happens to them if your keys have issues or have troubles and have maintenance? So if you want someone to help you through that process, one-on-one, to create a multi-sig vault, to help you create an estate plan, to be an ongoing collaborative custody partner, and help reassure you in the face of all these products and all these innovations happening to Bitcoin atop the base layer, if you want to have someone assist you in the coming years and hopefully coming decades, Bitcoin Advisor could be a good place for you to consider. If you go to the link in the description, you can learn more about me and why I'm personally there as well. And I will send you dozens of pages of free documents, both about our company specifically at the Bitcoin Advisor and multi-sig and cloud custody in general. Purely educational content for you to learn about. Dozens of pages with great content, great perspectives, ideas, and thought-provoking perspectives for you to consider in the coming months and years as you take more and more of your Bitcoin into self-custody. So not only, again, do you get information about collaborative and multi-sig custody in general, and you also get information about the Bitcoin Advisor specifically. Also, I'm happy to send you, or you'll find a link below, a comparison of what Bitcoin Advisor does compared to our competition, what we provide, and our goal is to provide 10 times the value for half the cost. So if you have an interest in multisig, I strongly encourage you to consider it now. More and more companies are only going to have the option of multisig. See, a company or a charity or a church cannot pursue the option of a single sig solution. They have to pursue multisig solutions. So as an individual, as a company, or as a board of a charity or church, whatever the case, if you're interested in a multi-sig solution for the long term, for cold storage, I highly encourage you to start doing so now. Whether that's with me at the Bitcoin Advisor or elsewhere, I strongly encourage you to do it because that rehypothecation will continue, Bitcoin's rapid price appreciation will continue, and in those events, demand will skyrocket for these precise kinds of services and for time with people that are experts in this field. So, again, once more, please check out the link in the description for the Bitcoin Advisor where you can find me. You can schedule a meeting with me. You can book a free consultation with me there. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Again, happy to send you dozens of pages of free complimentary information for you to learn more about your Bitcoin and learn more about your Bitcoin self-custody solutions. Because again, whether you work with me or not, it's far more important. Please just consider taking self-custody as soon as possible. Link in the description. Thanks.
And what I argue in the book is that it's largely due to the mismatch of transaction speeds and settlement speeds, which, was always kind of around to some extent in the kind of the 500 plus years. But really, since the dawn of the telegraph has accelerated, which is to say that we can send money around the world. We can send information and transactions around the world instantaneously, almost with the speed of light. But any sort of like bare asset settlement is slow, especially when you include verification and things like that. And so that gap has been heavily arbitraged by banks, central banks, arbitrators, and that's a problem. And that's how we split into these 160 plus different, floating currency bubbles. We basically recreated barter in the global monetary system, even though money's supposed to make it so we don't do barter. And what I argue in the book is that Bitcoin and to some intermediate extent stablecoins basically pierce those bubbles. They say, well, money's a market good, and all these monopolies are now under threat because now we have better ways to pay people or to save wherever you are in the world, as long as you have an internet connection. As long as you have some degree of development connection to the world, it's not really necessarily going to help North Koreans. It's not going to help maybe the absolute destitute, poorest places in the world. But it's this thing we're striving for is the more interconnected the world gets, we now can go around their banking systems. We can now make money a global market good again and give people more choices on how to protect their savings, how to engage in international commerce without firewalls between them, and how to hopefully over the long term, not yet, but long term, price their goods and services in unit of account that also protects them from debasement of their, income, just besides from just their savings.
Yeah, I know you have experience with Egypt, the 20% plus there, and what's that like? I'd be curious to hear if you have any anecdotal stories from that. But also, what you're describing really reminds me of what Henry Ford talked about in 1921, Nikola Tesla, Hayek, Fuller. There are many others that predicted this many decades ago. You're talking about the telegraph, the global connection, internet era, all that. Looking back at those very early people, decades ahead of their time, do you think they would be pro Bitcoin? And assuming that you think they are, why do you think that they would believe Bitcoin is the answer to what they were describing in the past?
So I do think they would. Hayek said basically, I forget the exact quote, but he's like, we're not going to have good money until we take it out of the hands of government. We can't take it out of the hands violently, but we can only just introduce something sly and roundabout that we can't stop. I mean, that's literally Bitcoin. That's literally Satoshi. So he couldn't, he basically described Bitcoin before it came. Ford talked about Bitcoin backed, money backed by energy. So did Fuller. Um, some people fall into the trap of they envision something, and then if something comes along that's not exactly what they envisioned, they resist that thing. So, and I would hope that none of them would have fallen into that trap to be like, like they become like kind of salty anti-Bitcoiners because it's not exactly what they envisioned or something. But aside from that trap, yes, I think all those people would have appreciated Bitcoin if they were here and around to see it. They all had the types of minds that understood it. They understood, many of them understood the kind of perils of the banking system. Ford talked about that, and Hayek, of course, had plenty to write about that. Um, and so I think basically the shared kind of conception there is that rather than money being determined by a kind of small set of, leaders and the ability to kind of opaquely dilute one group and give it to another group, or just, kind of just arbitrarily do whatever they want without kind of much pushback. It's basically saying that money is resource constrained. And they some of them refer to energy specifically because energy is probably the purest type of resource constraint that we know of. But basically, it's a way of saying that money is honest.